Well, in 1994, I was a student at the University of Washington, studying education, master's degree in education. I had been out of the service since 1971. I resigned, and I worked for FAA for 23 years. But in '94, I had decided to retire from FAA and start a new career. And so I was in the bookstore at the University of Washington. I happened to go through and pick up a book called Above Top Secret by Timothy Good. I happened to turn to page 301. This is the truth. I was just flipping through it, and I stopped on page 301 for some reason. And on that page, in one paragraph there, just a short paragraph, it talks about UFOs being sighted over a missile base, and 10 missiles went down while the UFO was there. I got all excited about that. I said, "Hey, that's me. That's me. I was there." And so, and of course, you mentioned Malmstrom, Malmstrom Air Force Base. So, as a result of that, I went to the nearest MUFON chapter and got a hold of James Klotz the first time I met him. And he's a co-author of my book, by the way. It's called Faded Giant. And at any rate, I asked Klotz to submit a Freedom of Information Act request to the Air Force about this strange event, which I read in this book about 10 missiles going down under unusual circumstances. I told Klotz not to say a thing about UFOs, so because that would we wouldn't get a good response, I'm sure. So he did. The Air Force wrote back and said, this is still classified, but since you've asked and since it's been so long, we're going to declassify the incident and send you some documents. So they started sending us documents surrounding, and this is called the Echo Flight incident. So the documents very specific about the date of the incident, and the fact that they went down for no known reason, and that it was of grave concern to the Strategic Air Command headquarters.
I think that's interesting that, here they're saying it's of grave concern, but then in the, Condon report and the other ones, they said that they're of no concern.
Right.
It would concern me if a UFO, took over my whole launch facility and had the ability to either fire or change the directions or do whatever they want. I'd be a little concerned.
Right, exactly. This was clearly a national security incident. And that telegram itself, just by itself, is indicative of that. The Air Force had no clue as to why these missiles went down the way they did. These are very reliable systems. They're all independent of each other. They're not connected in series like a string of Christmas tree lights or anything like that. But at any rate, as a result of these documents that I started getting, I decided to go public, and tell my story. And so I did. I went on a sighting show, and then I went on the Art Bell show, and so I started talking. At the time I started talking about this, I thought I was the guy at Echo Flight. Well, it turns out that I wasn't one of the crew members at Echo Flight. I was at another flight. I was at Oscar Flight. So I was finally able to contact the two crew members of Echo Flight. That's Eric Carlson and Walt Fiegel. Both are still alive, as far as I know. And then I was able to contact my commander in the capsule, Fred Mywall. So this is part of the critical evidence that I've got. I've got Fiegel on audio tape. He's given me permission to use it, and I have published that audio tape. Again, it's on that website I mentioned. It's in a story that Robert Hastings wrote in support of this case. And then I've got Fred Mywald on audio tape, backing the story up I just told you. Pretty much. He thinks that there were less than 10 missiles that went down, but I'm sticking to my story because I've got another supported witness, and that is Robert Jameson, who was one of the speakers at the press club. And Jameson recalls vividly on March 24th going out to Oscar Flight and working on our missiles, and all 10 of them had gone down. So he's on record as stating that. Let's see. Where would you like to go from there?
Well, I know if they find one little glitch in your story, that they'll throw everything else and just focus on that one glitch. So so it's amazing that you have these people coming forward and backing you up, 100%, and it's always necessary in this field.
Well, I can't say 100%. There, some of these guys are just reluctant to, come forward like the three gentlemen I mentioned, Mywald and Fiegel and Carlson, have really wanted to stay in the background. They didn't want to be out there about this. By the way, with Eric Carlson, I have 2 letters from him under his signature, and one letter he supports what Walt Fiegel told me during our telephone conversation on tape. Basically, he and Fiegel collaborated after that phone call, and he said that he couldn't remember anything else other than what Fiegel had said. And so, anyway, that's the essential part of my my evidence. I've also got letters from Bob Kaminsky, who was head of the Boeing team that investigated the Echo flight shutdowns. And in this letter to me, under his signature, again, he says this was a UFO incident, as told to him, that it was a UFO incident.
Have you heard anything from the guards, or have any of them come forward? They've got to have seen this. It's all over the news. So,
yes, I'm really hopeful that they'll come forward. I haven't heard from any of them. I'll tell you, these guys were all weapons trained. This was during the Vietnam War, and I'm afraid some of them got sent to Vietnam and may not have come back. But I have not heard from any of the guards in my case.
Well, I hope they didn't make sure they didn't come back. You know how that goes sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. It's amazing how with all this evidence and the witnesses, the impeccable credibility of the witnesses, and I know with all of the other bases that the information is coming out with Robert Hastings' work, with these other witnesses, it's pretty much a done deal. I don't see how they can, one, say UFOs don't exist, or two, come out and say that they're not some kind of a threat to national security.
Yeah, right now, the Air Force seems to be hunkering down. They're hoping this will all blow over next news cycle.
Yeah.
But like you said, it got so much press that I don't think this is going to go away in people's minds.
No.
And eventually, someone's going to, basically what's happened here is, by their silence, the Air Force is calling 7 of us liars. Like I said, we've got our testimony in affidavits, signed affidavits. They're for public viewing. Anybody can go to my website and see them. And we're directly confronting the Air Force about their statement that no UFO incident reported or investigated by the Air Force has ever resulted in a national security incident or event. And it's blatantly false. It's just an outright lie.
Oh, definitely. I know there's a couple of UK radio shows. I know you didn't want to mention the name, and I've been on them, and they were just brutal. And, they didn't care about the facts or the evidence or anything else. They were just a total hatchet job and a disinformation campaign. So I imagine, I'm pretty sure I know who you're talking about as far as whoever did the interview with you over there.
Yeah. Well, but, I look at it this way: if they're talking about it, that's a plus.
Oh yeah.
Even if they're trying to, negate it somehow, but like I said, my testimony, my evidence is out there for anybody to look at. I'm completely open about showing the original documents to anybody that's bona fide investigator or anything like that. And, of course, I'd be willing to swear on my oath in Congress, if so called.
Yeah. Yeah, we have the evidence we have here is just so overwhelming. And, and I told the guy, I said, look, we've got triple PhD Boeing engineers, Skunk Works operators, Lockheed engineers. All of them have witnessed the activity here, filmed it, will testify. And that wasn't enough, because I didn't have a piece of a ship. That wasn't enough. And I told him, I said, I don't want a piece of the ship, because anybody who's ever come in contact with an alien artifact or a piece of a ship, it mysteriously disappears or they disappear. And so it gets real ugly after that. So, and I said, I really don't want a piece of the ship, and there's enough evidence there to choke a horse. So, but they still, this guy still just, that was the only thing he could try to discredit me with, and he focused everything around that. And then finally I just told him, I said, you have paranormal in front of your station. And I said, this is not paranormal. I said, this is about as normal as you can get. And I said, in fact, it's probably one of the most closed-minded, and they actually hung up on me, so, and did some shotgun effect, and then hung up on me. It was amazing. I couldn't believe it. I just said, what was that about, so, but, I just, the evidence is here, the air traffic controllers, the pilots, all the evidence that we have here is here if anybody wants to see it. The footage, cameras don't have an imagination with the testimony of the witnesses, but, it's still, I know there are some people out there, and I'm sure you're going to run into them, and they have an agenda, and that agenda is disinformation.
Right.
And they're going to do everything they can to discredit, attack your character on every level.
See, what they're basing their disinformation campaign on is human nature is that, we think we know what our world is like, and what is true and what it isn't true. We've kind of conjured these things in our minds, and that's what they play on. They play on people's current status quo beliefs, but this is a real phenomenon, and by that I mean it's. I don't think anybody can really explain it at this point. I mean, I know you've had a lot of experiences out there. By the way, we can talk about what I saw when I was out there, too.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to hear, tell listeners what your experience was while you were here, even though it was a slow night, because of the weather and the clouds and everything, but we did have a little activity.
Well, it didn't seem slow to me. I was pretty excited about it.
Oh, good.
Yeah, well, of course, we went out there me and my wife visited you this last summer. I can't remember when it was. September 2nd, I think it was. And we went out to that big field you've got out there at about 10 o'clock at night. You came out with your binoculars, night vision binoculars, and after a while, we began to see lights on Mount Adams, and you were gracious enough to let me use the binoculars most of the evening. And I was looking at these lights, and they moved very slowly. This one particular light moved very slowly, and it seemed to be on the mountain or very close to the mountain. And every once in a while it would flare. The light would flare. And you pointed out to me that there are no roads on Mount Adams. From our vantage point, we couldn't see any roads. And there was a large snowfield on the right side where this light was. So it couldn't have been a automobile.